God, guns against government. It is your duty to resist. If you are not being attacked, you are not worshiping God correctly. Pull out your man card. We must take over the pillars of society to create the end times or die in pursuit. Give me your high-earning tradesmen, your law enforcement. Give me your youth. Bar the experts and the higher educated. Outcast dissenters. Blare the music and gaze upon the modern American marionette doubled as a grain silo. Give me your teenage boys. I will re-educate them. Train them in warfighting tactics, techniques, and procedures. We must make an army for God to protect us from the evil that attacks and occupies our nation. Give me a compound, more land, more political influence, more guns. Assault the objective, slay the dragon, and save the girl. Pay my bills because I am a prophet of God. No, this episode is not about radical Islamic terrorists. It's about Jesus, John Wayne, and jihad. Happening right now in the quiet town of Wenatchee, Washington. Hello world, my name is Data Mining Mike, and in the town where I grew up, there seems to be an issue. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to identify a charlatan or false prophet. We have today a special guest, Dominic Bonney. Dominic Bonney is the most influential investigative journalist in the area, and he has been investigating this reckless gun cult known as Grace City Church. I am highly confident that at the end of this period of instruction, you will be able to take what you have learned and become much more informed about the world of charlatanism and dangerous cults. Be sure to check out all of Dominic's information in the video description below. Leave all questions and comments below. Be sure to like, subscribe, smash that bell for more data-driven updates.
But it's our prayer that we could be doing dozens of these a year. That's going to take property and it's going to take staff. So I'm not even joking. If you're here and got 1,000 acres, come talk to me afterwards. We'd love for you to give it to the church. We don't have money to buy it. I'm just going to be honest, we don't. So just put all our cards on the table, and you bring your cards to the table, and we'll see what God can do. But if we're going to do this on a regular basis, we'd need some property. Doing a pop-up man card project on a buddy's property is fun, but not sustainable for the next 15, 20 years.
Cool. And we are live. Welcome. Welcome.
Thank you.
World. Dominic Bonney to the podcast. Tell the world about you.
Well, I'm an independent journalist, and I own my own business, a marketing business, but my background educationally is in journalism. I went to WSU, the Edward R. Murrow School of Communications, and while I was there, before I left school, I ran the Daily Evergreen, which is the daily student newspaper. So they published, at that time, 5 days a week. So I'd go to class, get off, usually eat something, go to work, and then we would get done around 11 p.m. And the next morning it would get printed and on the newsstands. So that was my experience, I guess, educationally with journalism. And you run a staff, so you have a staff of editors and a staff of reporters. Sports is a big deal, right, for WSU. So, lots of special sections on football games, previews, stuff like that, lots of arts and entertainment stuff, and then some hard news. I won a student journalism award for a expose piece that I did about a girl who basically cried wolf, that she was being attacked on campus, and at this time it was a very hot button issue where they had teams of people in special placards or outfits and stuff like that would escort women around campus. There was a for free taxi service that would take women where they needed to go. So it was a very heightened time for violence against women on campuses for whatever reason. This is 2008, 2009. And this girl, for whatever reason, a bit of a cry for attention, basically staged a scenario where she was attacked. She was not, as it turns out. And I wrote a piece, investigative piece about that, and basically blew the lid off of it. And that kind of was my first foray into investigative journalism, and I really liked it. But you know, as a cub reporter, you leave and you get a job and you just have to work your beat, and there's not a lot of like investigative angles or avenues when you're a new reporter. So I was just a business reporter. That's what brought me to Wenatchee, and I pretty much put that away for 10 years and picked up the investigative reporting thing around COVID, mainly because of Grace City Church.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what started you down the journey of Grace City Church?
Well, yeah. So Grace City Church, I knew that there was a connection to Mark Driscoll from Mars Hill Church, which was a huge drama in about 2013, 2014 in the Seattle area. Mars Hill had grown. I'm not sure if you know much about Mars Hill. Mars Hill had grown into a national church with campuses across the U.S., but mainly in the western states. And mainly, you know, it kind of grew out of Seattle. And there's this movement called the Young, Restless, and Reformed movement. And Mark Driscoll was kind of the leading figure of this Young, Restless, and Reformed movement. And it was basically this hyper-masculine backlash, very militant backlash to what Mark Driscoll would call, you know, women's church. So sensitive pastors and pastors in pastel business suits with, you know, pastel ties, and they are effeminate and all of these things that basically he was like, we need to be macho, we need to be hyper masculine. You know, Christ's message is a message of strength and power and masculinity, and we need to embrace that and divorce ourselves from the femininity of so many of these mainstream Protestant sects, like what you see in the Lutheran Church and all of these. And so, you know, he's a Calvinist, and so Mark Driscoll is essentially Josh McPherson, the executive pastor and founding pastor, church planter is what they call it, of Grace City Church. They are friends. Mark stays with the McPhersons when they come to vacation here in the summertime. He was recently here for the last Stronger Men conference last month, which he opened. He spoke at that. And Mark Driscoll is a very polarizing figure. If your listeners or anybody who you know or yourself want to listen to it, Christianity Today did a whole podcast on him fairly recently called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. And it's a pretty deep dive into what made Mark tick and how his fall from grace worked. Former members and former investors of Mars Hill sued him for racketeering, claiming that he took funds donated to the church and used them to buy copies of his book called Real Marriage, The Truth About Sex, Love, and something or other. It's got a long title, but it's called Real Marriage. And he co-authored it nominally with his wife Grace. When that came out in like 2014, people say, a lot of ex-members say he used church funds to buy up the book so that it would get further up on the New York Times bestseller list. So essentially they were accusing him of fraud. Wow. So they sued him for their money back. That really went nowhere. In the meantime, that was kind of the last thing that happened that led to his fall from grace. Mars Hill, which had like 5 campuses in the Seattle metro area and like 25,000 members in Washington State, basically went away. And Grace City Church is a part of the same network, or was. They are no longer. It's called the Acts 29 Network, which Mark Driscoll helped found. He was later kicked out of the Acts 29 Network, and the Acts 29 Network has its own set of scandals and sexual drama, but that's after Mark was kicked out. Mark was kicked out for being basically a bully, an overbearing tyrant. So they have no affiliation with him anymore, but Grace City Church was essentially born out of this Mars Hill rise to power.
Dang.
Yeah. So that's the backstory.
All right.
Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So the pastor of Grace City Church was a disciple at one point of this Mars Hill.
Mark Driscoll, yeah.
Mark Driscoll. and he got essentially excommunicated due to his aggressive behavior or not fitting in, not being a cultural fit.
Well, and another thing that he did was he went into their like website, intranet thing, and they had a chat board, and he was using a pen name called William Wallace II. William Wallace from Braveheart.
Okay.
Yeah. They really love Braveheart.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Braveheart is a huge cultural touchstone for this hyper-masculine Christian kind of a thing. And it transcends the Protestant thing, because my background is in Catholicism, and Braveheart was a huge part of every men's retreat, every youth retreat. When you take the boys aside, you break up the boys away from the girls get their own talk, the boys get their own talk. Braveheart was always a huge thing. So going back to the mid-aughts, Braveheart was kind of interwoven with this thing. And Mark Driscoll is kind of like that hipster pastor. Like, he had a faux hawk, he's wearing flannels, and like he's wearing expensive clothes, but he doesn't look like a pastor. He looks like, and Mark Driscoll Josh McPherson does the same thing. It's just more of a rural flavor, right? So he's wearing a ball cap, he's wearing a t-shirt. He used to wear t-shirts with slogans, the Gadsden flag, stuff like that when he preached. Now he just wears a flannel button up and jeans. But as you notice, and people who have left the church say, it's really weird because everybody starts to dress like Josh after a while. The guys, and the women kind of dress like Sharon. So, those are one of those red flag things where it's like, well, if you see, if you see a few of these red flags, like if their books, if their financials are not open to their members, that's a red flag. Once people start to homogenize and all dress like the leader, that's a red flag. Vocabulary, they use the same vocabulary as the leader, red flag. So some people call Grace City and what Mark Driscoll has established. He's started a new church called Trinity Church in Scottsdale, Arizona. The word cult gets thrown around quite a bit when describing Mark's leadership style. And that transfers, or that is a learned trait. I'm not sure if it's a learned trait or it's just something that's natural to McPherson, but there's a similarity in the very assertive, some say tyrannical leadership style.
Yeah. Uniforms create uniform behavior, uniform thought, and they start saying the same things. Have you watched much of what they've been saying on YouTube, McPherson?
Yes, I do. More often than not, I have people send me stuff.
Okay.
When he says something really out there, like recently he said, if you're not a Christian, or if you're a Christian and you're not getting shot at, and he's using shot at metaphorically, but I had multiple people send me this reel. If you're a Christian and you're not getting shot at, or you're not essentially being attacked for your convictions, then you're not really doing the work of a Christian, right? If you're if you're not rocking the boat, if you're not creating disturbance, if you're not disrupting, it's almost like that Silicon Valley kind of mentality where it's like move fast and break things, disrupt. And one of my questions that I would ask, and I have asked, is disrupt for what? Like, what's the point? What's do you have a better way of doing Christianity? And if so, what does that look like? Because these organizations are built to scale, right? So just like Mark Driscoll, like essentially he's quoted in that podcast, The Rise and Fall of Mark Driscoll, or of Mars Hill, he's quoted as saying, like, I'm not, like, God doesn't even want me to. I don't even need to listen to any pastor with fewer followers than I have. And so he's like, I'm clocking in at whatever, 45,000 or 50,000 or 70,000 nationally. The only people I'm going to listen to or take advice or admonishment or guidance or any sort of criticism from have more followers than me. So, Joel Osteen here, sort of person, or a, whoever, name your celebrity pastor. If they were to call up, well, maybe Mark would listen. But if you've got 5,000 people, if you're a pastor and you've only got 5,000 people, Obviously, God gave you less talent or less ability than he has. Therefore, he should not have to listen to you or your criticisms.
Interesting way to value yourself. It seems like a pretty modern way in which a lot of people fallaciously value themselves. And I'm starting to notice the connection too, because you can buy followers, you can buy subscribers. That means nothing to me. Can you get more views than subscribers? That means more to me. But yeah, that what a way to base your value. So he is basically putting it as my digital following is a representation of how good I am as a human, even though that's like saying, yeah, I bought this Lamborghini, that means I'm a rich person, but all you own's a Lamborghini.
Yeah, kind of. You know, and to go back to the William Wallace thing. Okay. So William Wallace II, he went in and basically wrote this whole diatribe that essentially equates women to penis homes. You know, he said, you know, a woman's body is a home for a man's penis, and it's really important that you respect the penis home, and blah, blah, blah. It was very controversial, especially once it was a Seattle Times piece that came out in like 2013 or 2014. And somebody ratted him out and said William Wallace II on this website, on this Mars Hill website, is actually Mark Driscoll himself. And that was one of the most egregious things he said, but he also said some other things, or wrote some other things that were very controversial as William Wallace II. So that was a big one, and just essentially teaching a very rigid, very traditional Calvinist outlook on men and women gender dynamics. You know, in that world, it goes God, the priesthood holder, which is the man. So the man of the household is the priesthood holder, then the woman, and then the kids, right? So it's God, man, everyone else in any given situation. So this mentality, when you teach it, that essentially like your authority is only second to God's authority, and then sprinkle in the overtones with the militia stuff, where we go out and we you know, do fake military training in the woods together, and we dress in fatigues together, and we go and do the whole stronger men, you know.
They do that?
Oh yeah, they had a 50 caliber.
I didn't realize they were bringing weapon systems into the mix now.
Oh yeah. I mean, Mark Driscoll or Josh McPherson has, from what I'm told by law enforcement people who I don't want to say their names, but is that they've got gun safes and a panic room for Josh McPherson and his family at the compound, so that if, you know, a former member essentially told me that when they looked at the plans, it was an invite-only event, and you were instructed to not bring your cell phone and not record anything. So as he started telling me this story, I was like, became more and more interested in what was said. And he said that they laid out the plans, and this was before they started building in the Sunny Slope compound. And he said, okay, so here's, you know, going to be the gun wall, and it's a homage kind of a thing to the firearm, and we're going to have, you know, essentially American firearms throughout the history of America. So going back to the Brown Bess of the Revolutionary era, to the carbines of the westward expansion, to the M1 rifle of, you know, World War II, to the M16 of the Vietnam era. You know, like, so essentially like a shrine, I suppose, to the gun. And if we need to, you know, and we'll have a gun library. So, you know, people can come and check out guns and go and use them, which is technically illegal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if that ever became a thing, but this is what, you know, this couple that was there at these meetings said. And essentially he said, you know, and if we need to, this is where we'll make our last stand, the compound. So, you know, he said it was laughed off, kind of like a ha 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 kind of a thing, but this is a very real thing that these congregations talk about, because they also have very a lot of interest in missionary work in developing countries, specifically like Papua New Guinea. And in Papua New Guinea, like churches and their compounds are like walled, barbed wire on top, and they have armed guards. And that's because they will be ransacked, right? So they have to protect their compound. Mm-hmm. Essentially, this is kind of that same mentality, but instead of Papua New Guinea or South Africa or somewhere like that, we're in Wenatchee, Washington, where I would say the likelihood of a church being ransacked for its riches and its stuff is statistically insignificant. It's, you know, I mean, churches get broken into every once in a while, but like this idea of like a horde of anti-Christian, Antifa, BLM zombies essentially is what one of their guys said. BLM zombies are going to attack us. Well, I don't know about that. Maybe, probably not.
Yeah, no. So his justification is he's taking the same sort of foreign missionary mentality. We need to protect ourselves and our compound. We need to create one here. We need to create a militia, which I've always thought was interesting. They put all these gun laws to try to regulate our guns, but at the same time, there is no regulation as to who can train a militia. And we have a right to create a militia, but there's no regulation as to that. That's interesting. It's just the guns. It's not like, okay, take the guns away. How are you going to get people to organize to assault an objective?
Yeah.
To employ a weapon system to repel an assault from an invader.
Yeah.
And so let's go into the law enforcement in the town. What's been their take on it?
Well, they've made great efforts to court law enforcement, and that goes back to, you know, there was a really big marriage retreat in like 2015, and essentially it was marketed to all local law enforcement guys, all guys, not the women in law enforcement, which there's not many, and there was fewer in 2015, but essentially it was like marketed. They did a video, you can still find it on their Facebook and their YouTube if you go back far enough. And they had, at that time, Sheriff Brian Burnett, a bunch of, you know, law enforcement guys saying, you know, this retreat has been so good for my marriage. The problems facing first responders and law enforcement people are unique, and they put unique stresses on marriages. And McPherson and Grace City Church understand that, and this is tailored to what our needs are, you know. And so, from sources telling me, that was a huge recruitment tool for them. And then, you know, basically they're not shy about soliciting people to come to their church at work. So this is something that I've had reported happened at the Chelan County PUD, and especially at the law enforcement and fire, but mostly law enforcement. So it's like between shifts or on off time or whatever, people who go to Grace City Church will invite you. You know, so if you're a new lateral hire from Grant County or out of state or something like that, you're probably going to be solicited to go to that church within the first couple weeks, you know, and then they'll weigh and measure you. And if you're not interested, well, they'll probably leave you alone. But, you know, what they want is law enforcement. And then they want also to be able to wear that on their sleeve and say, look, all the cops go here. Right? And you should be in this church because we understand you uniquely, and no other pastors really understand the problems that you as a law enforcement officer go through, you know. And then there's also perks, which I'm told that, you know, the Cafe Mela owns a cafe there, and if you're law enforcement, you eat and drink for free there. So a lot of, you know, Brian Burnett would go out there and have lunch basically every day, and so that's an attraction as well. Yeah. Interesting.
So I'm not up to date with like who's who in the zoo as far as law enforcement, because I'm a Spokane native. So
so Brian Burnett was the sheriff, and he's a very prominent Grace City Church member. And in the course of my reporting, I got through a public record, I got a survey, a employee satisfaction survey, and it was pretty negative. And some of the complaints were about the quote-unquote God Squad. So one person essentially said, and I'm paraphrasing, but closely paraphrasing, is if you're not a part of the God Squad, your career is going nowhere in this department, and you might as well lateral out and go find a different department, because if you don't go to the same church as Brian Burnett, the sheriff, you're not gonna rise in the ranks here. So all the people in his God Squad, except for one, was and is Grace City Church members. So you kind of have like almost a cabal within a department, right? So his administration, mostly God Squad, mostly GCC. So they all go to church on Sunday together, and they all work together 6 days a week. So they're basically together 7 days a week.
That's creepy. It's creepy in the fact that if what you are saying is fact, then that means we have religion incorporated with state.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And the reason I got started on this was because I wanted to do a segment of my TV show on NCW Life, which is the local TV channel. And I had a show on there, and the idea was I would do it for free, and I would bring good content, but I had full editorial control. And I wanted to do a segment on the Vector Academy, which is one of the things that kind of really caught my eye around the COVID time. They'd been coming out and basically saying, don't wear masks, the vaccines, are, Josh McPherson said, quote, the vaccines are super spreading the virus when they came out. So lots of conspiracy theory stuff. And that started to really get my attention, because I was hearing from medical professionals that, Grace City Church is a detriment to public health in the Chelan and Douglas counties. And I thought, okay, well, that seems a little hyperbolic, but these are coming from specialists who spent more than 8 years in the medical training for these really high-level specialties, on infectious disease. And if these infectious disease doctors and experts think that they're impacting our public health, that's really something worth taking note of. So this Vector Academy is essentially their alternative to college. And two guys who were slated to be instructors caught my eye. One was Douglas Wilson out of Moscow, Idaho. Do you know anything about him? No. So the Spokesman Review has actually done quite a bit of reporting on Douglas Wilson. He is the pastor of, it's called Christ Church in Moscow, Idaho. It's also known as Mother Kirk by the locals. It's a bit of a derisive moniker, Mother Kirk, but he's also used the term. Anyway, he's said things like slavery was good. The slaves had it basically made. They had medical care, they were clothed and housed and fed, and the antebellum South was a paradise, essentially. And these tales of slaves being whipped and raped and all this stuff, overblown. Kind of a thing. He also is famous for basically saying you can't rape your own wife. There's no way to do that because she's your property. In fact, there's one passage from one of his books in which he equates marital rape to trespassing in your own garden. It's impossible to trespass in your own garden because it's your garden, meaning your wife's body. Yeah. And this is endorsed by his wife. His own wife co-wrote that book with him. And that's a big way that these guys kind of get away with teaching and preaching some pretty misogynistic stuff. Well, their wives sign up, or their wives are co-authored on that. So there's a woman signing off on that. It doesn't really matter or mean anything, but to them it does. One can argue Stockholm Syndrome is a part of this this dynamic, but so Douglas Wilson, that's kind of a snapshot of who he is. He's enabled and empowered pedophiles and testified on their behalf, specifically one man who was molesting his child, who Douglas Wilson essentially went to testified on his behalf for reducing his prison sentence for that, saying, he's been redeemed by God. He has asked for forgiveness, yada, 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 trying to get this guy's prison sentence lowered. And then once he was out of prison, I think he did 13 months for that, he hired him at Mother Kirk. So there's this pervasive, cavalier attitude towards men who are sexual predators. So that him being one of the instructors that was named for the Vector Academy, I was taken aback, and so I was going to do a segment of my show about it, and I got told no, I can't do that, which was the first time I was censored. So I said, okay, well, whatever, I'll move on. And then they said, well, you can blog about it, very condescendingly, I might add. So I thought, well, I'll do that then. And so I wrote a blog post on Medium, and this was about 2 years ago, and it got about 35,000 readers in about 24 hours.
That's really good.
Yeah, and it was just out of the blue. I can't
figure out Medium yet.
Yeah, well, it just happened to hit that. It just hit it right at the right time, and it was very brief, and you can go back. It still gets hundreds of reads every week. I can see the stats, but it's called The Vector Academy and a Struggle for Power in Wenatchee, Washington. Okay, is the title of it, and I essentially just kind of provided a snapshot of how Grace City Church was getting involved in local law enforcement. They sent a group of protesters to shut down Wenatchee School Board meeting, which I was asked.
Damn, I didn't know they were sending forth out people, kind of like protesters protesting military funerals, kind of a thing.
Yeah, a little bit like the Westboro Baptist.
Westboro Baptist, yeah.
Yeah, the morning or the Sunday before that event, that was like a Wednesday or a Tuesday night is when the school board meetings are. That Sunday, Josh McPherson's brother, Kerry, preached a sermon titled Permission to Protest. So, permission to protest, and then the next day, basically, a woman who, her name is Anna Witherington, and she's a school district employee, interestingly enough. School district employee, GCC follower, posts on Facebook, hey, Pastor Kerry's trying to get a group of people to go basically harass the school board tomorrow. And that was over comprehensive sex ed and masks. Because at that time you had to wear masks in schools, in any public meeting. And so about a group of about 50 people showed up refusing to wear masks and proceeded to be belligerent, yell. One guy who works for Localtel actually jumped up and kind of rushed the table where the school board members sit. Most specifically, Maria Iniguez, the only woman of color on the school board, as she was speaking, right? So something she said triggered him, and he jumped up, balls, fists,
bald fist,
bald hands, and he was kind of, and that was, it was tense. The whole meeting was tense, but I thought to myself, I might have to actually step in here. Because there was no police, there was no security guard, there was nothing. It was just the school board sitting there at a table. Thankfully, he didn't get any closer, as I thought, if he takes one more step closer to Maria, I'm going to hit him with my camera. And I didn't have to do that, and I thank goodness I didn't have to do that. But you could feel the tension in that room. I've never been to a public meeting that was that tense and like anticipatory of violence. Like you could definitely, it was palpable in that room. So it naturally created a lot of talk around town and a lot of backlash for Grace City Church.
Okay, so let's go into there's that seems to be a trend too in America, where you got people going to the causing a shit fit in these school board meetings, whether it's over gender or race, or maybe some like otherkins need litter boxes in the toilet or whatever. It's something ridiculous like that. So what was the context that they were so angry about?
Masks and kids wearing masks. And also the shutdown of schools. So schools had been shut down, and there was a lot of virtual learning. And some of the parents were really mad about that. Specifically, one woman named Rachel Petro, who is also a member and on the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce. So it's not necessarily that they're only interested in law enforcement; it's that they want their people in positions of power. So they want, they've solicited the mayors to be a part of, as soon as they had a meeting about how to respond. And that's another part of the story, is that Josh McPherson, according to himself, his own words, he helped lead a lawsuit against Jay Inslee over COVID mandates. So the masking indoors and the other stuff that basically was, they say illegal decree. A mandate is not law, although it has the force of law under a emergency, right? Emergency declaration, right? The executive has the ability to pass a mandate that has the force of law. It's not always going to be that case. Once the state of emergency goes away, that mandate is lifted. Regardless, they were pretty pissed, and he gathered a group of people to do a class action suit against Jay Inslee personally. That originally, the group originally met at his house out near Monitor, which is not too far from where we are. And, both of the mayors were solicited to come. He essentially writes in his manifesto about this. It's pretty thick. It's about that thick, and it's, 8.5 by 11.
He's got a manifesto?
He's got multiple. Yeah. And I've included links to that in my reporting, but this one was called 9 Lenses to See COVID-19 More Clearly. And essentially it's 9 chapters, and it's his rationale for why they sued the governor, and why these public health, vaccines are essentially satanic. Masking is satanic, and all this stuff. So it's his rationale for what he did. But he says in that manifesto, I called public leaders to my house, in a very almost narcissistic way. Like he rang the bell and they showed up on his doorstep. So he explains the whole scenario, and he worked with Kerry Condata, who's the Republican chair of the Chelan County GOP and a former member of the legislature, and basically got a lawyer and entered a lawsuit against Jay Inslee that eventually went nowhere. But they did a photo shoot, the whole 9 yards. They did a marketing campaign for it. It was pretty wild.
Yeah. So it seems like he wants to jump on the trend of all the other pastors. And so I got you. Yeah. So let no crisis be left exploited, even if it is. And we don't know if he did, but even if it is sourcing agent provocateurs to these events.
Oh yeah.
To at least to push some sort of agenda. What's interesting to me is getting the police involved.
Yeah.
Because how would you use that police force to then detract federal investigators?
Yes. Yeah, so local control is a mantra. It's a very vague mantra, but it's something that is constantly repeated, and repeated by people in elected positions who are affiliated or share the same values as GCC. And the idea, I think, is to basically create an island of autonomy where that's fine. The rules apply to everybody else, but Chelan and Douglas County, because we have collected enough powerful people and enough people in law enforcement, and you see this in Brian Burnett's declarations to refuse to enforce certain laws, specifically related around firearms, because he was a constitutional sheriff. So have you heard anything about the constitutional sheriff thing?
Not quite. If I had to guess, it's whatever they view the original Constitution to be, and that's how they interpret the law, and that's how they're going to enforce it.
Yes, and that no elected official has authority over the sheriff in his county to interpret the Constitution. So essentially, it's a get out of jail free card for, ignoring the legislature of your state, because according to the constitutional sheriff theory, the governor is not a higher power than the sheriff in his county. The legislature is not a higher power than the sheriff in his county. The sheriff's power comes from the U.S. and state constitution. Therefore, he is, or she, but he usually is the first, last, and middle arbiter of what the Constitution says. So therefore, you are legally justified in refusing any law that you feel is unconstitutional in your county. Yeah. So it's this idea of like, we want to kind of be an autonomous island of legal and cultural sovereignty. Yeah.
Well, they're doing a good job of it.
Yeah. And that's also why they want to really focus on the differences between the west side and the east side of Washington state.
Oh, okay.
And they say culturally, we're not the same state, religiously, like here's where people of faith live, here's where people of family values live, and over there is where it's corruption, it's filth, it's politicians in Olympia, it's homeless in Seattle, and they want to. I mean, essentially, it's dog whistling an old movement in Eastern Washington, which is the whatever you want to call it, Liberty State. They want to take Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, and most of Idaho, part of Montana, and make it its own state, essentially, within the United States. It's called the American Redoubt. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that. The American
Redoubt, no, never heard of this. I've heard of the separating East from West Washington, but not rezoning the states to...
Yeah. I mean, the creating a state would be a step towards the eventual goal of what a lot of these Christian fascists, essentially, they're Christian nationalists, and one is out of Spokane. He's a big, he's in the mix, is Matt Shea. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of him.
Was he running for something?
He was in the legislature.
Okay, because I remember seeing that.
Now he's a pastor.
Okay, interesting.
In Spokane Valley. So he was a state rep from Spokane Valley. He was censured by the Republicans for supporting the Bundys during their Malheur National Refuge. They took over the refuge, pointed guns at feds, and had a whole thing. One guy died trying to run through a roadblock.
Yep, I remember that whole thing.
Yeah, Lavoy Finicum was his name. Anyway, Matt gave them aid and comfort, essentially, sent care packages and called them up, and was on a radio program supporting them, very vocally, like, this is great, these guys are doing the right thing. And he's been very anti-federal, pro this American Redoubt thing. And essentially it's an old idea, like I said. It goes back to the 70s at least. It's kind of what the Aryan Nation was trying to do in Hayden Lake in North Idaho with their compound, was they want to move to this area because it is homogeneously white. It's one of the least diverse regions in the entire country. So you won't eventually have to kick out too many people of color once you establish your redoubt. So their idea is they want to establish a autonomous political zone that is ran by Christian nationalists, fascists, and then eventually they can either subjugate or expel people of color, specifically Latinos and Asians, because that's most of the minority populations that we have.
Okay, so this Shea is part of the... So you're throwing a lot of different names here. So one guy from down in, was it Lewiston? Moscow. Yeah. And I'm just waiting for the point where you're going to say they believe they are prophets from God.
Yeah, I mean, it's not far off. It's called Dominionism. Have you ever heard of that term?
No, go ahead and explain it.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack here. So, and I'm sorry if I'm all over the place. Dominionism is essentially a end of days prophecy that says it's also called the Seven Mountain Mandate, and the idea is once Christians dominate the 7 mountains of cultural influence, that will be the time that Jesus comes back, or it will trigger Jesus coming back. The 7 mountains include education, politics, business, economics, culture and media, and that's 5 of them, and I can't remember the other 2 off the top of my head. They're a little bit redundant, to tell you the truth, but essentially the idea is that in order to usher about the end of the world, aka the second coming of Christ, we need to make America a theocracy, a Christian state. And we need to dominate, Christians need to dominate all of those 7 mountains. So if with that as your operating system in your mind, the behavior pattern of guys like Douglas Wilson and Mark Driscoll and Josh McPherson and Matt Shea make a lot more sense. Because what are they doing? They're trying to take over law enforcement and politics and run their own candidates and dominate education. And they want to create a parallel economy, right? They want their compound to be a quote-unquote community center. So they want to create a whole rival society within current society.
Okay, yeah. So it seems like they believe they're doing the... Is there so many similarities between this and radical Islam?
Yes.
So many similarities. It's just... Yeah, so many. Like, take over create a state to usher on the rapture.
Yes.
Because this is my destiny from God.
Yeah, it's like a caliphate. It's like kind of a thing.
And with it comes the myriad of things. And I think of similarities just based off of what you're saying. But what could possibly happen? Like, you could see, if you have a sheriff that doesn't want to enforce federal gun regulations at all, then don't be surprised if people start, breaking those laws or whatever. And I don't know what people are not doing. But, so... They are creating have you heard of the triangle of abuse? Okay, so the triangle of abuse, it's simple. There's a victim, a savior, and a perpetrator, right? And the triangle can shift. And it's like there is a us versus them, or there is the oppressor. The oppressors are these woke zombies that are out there to try to convince all of our kids that there's all these different genders, and you can be a rainbow fairy child if you want, and then go pee in your kitty furry litter box at school. Yeah. And so they create this narrative, and then they push it, and then and they've been pretty open about it. I just wonder what comes next. And you've alluded to things that usually comes next in the secession. Like, there are ways you can profile a terrorist. In the same ways, there are ways you can profile what's the next upcoming events that are going to be. Is it going to be, like you said, sexual assault? Because it seems like a lot of these go back to sexual assault. And they go back to... well, in America, it seemed like some sort of doing guns of some shit. Yeah. Whether it's Waco. Oh, yeah. Or... Like,
and there's the sex stuff was prevalent in Waco, too. It's these, non-denominational. They say non-denominational. And what they really mean is that we don't have a structure for accountability. Right?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. We don't have a structure for accountability.
Yeah. Other than what Josh McPherson would say is, I've got my elders. But in situations with pastors where it is a non-denominational thing, it's not affiliated with any other American Protestant denomination or structure above him, then, if he can make his own elders, right, of yes men and sycophants, then there essentially is no accountability structure. And that's what people say Mark Driscoll was so good at, was creating a system of a veneer of accountability. Like, I do have my elders, but they're not going to hold him accountable. So in reality, there is no higher power than Mark Driscoll, and that led to an abuse of power. But many would say abuse of power and abusive behaviors. And people have said that about Josh McPherson as well.
It just seems so contradictory. There's no higher power than some man with more followers than me. I'll listen to them. But then again, I won't listen to God. But it's like, okay, that's a unique approach.
Yeah. And so they grew through COVID in part because they were willing to bend or break the rules. And so a lot of people, a lot of Christians in town, Wenatchee Valley is a very faithful place. A lot of Christians here. And people who were pissed about Jay Inslee and angry that their churches were shut down, for a time there during the lockdowns, as they call it. Grace City was basically the only one who was like, our doors are still open. So they had a huge swell, an uptick of numbers. And I've spoken with other pastors who, that ruffled some feathers in the faith community here, because essentially they were being wooed by the McPhersons to come to their church because they were breaking the rules. And these guys, all guys, pastors, say, is not our job to, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. That's Christ's words from the Gospels. Isn't it our job to obey the laws of the land? And what happens when we start to say, well, that law doesn't count, so my followers and I aren't going to follow it? Where does that
system
end?
Of accountability end?
Exactly.
Right.
And who are you accountable to? Josh wrote in that manifesto, basically, there is no temporal power above a pastor's ability to commune with God. So
so he's saying he's a prophet.
Essentially.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
So he's gone to full prophetism. He's lost his damn mind, and he wants, okay.
I wish I would have brought that binder, but I will. But yeah, you can get a link to it. It's still on their website, and it's under publications. They have a publishing house. So I'm not sure if you knew that, but they have a whole publishing house.
Oh, shit.
They've published books. Most recently, it's a series of 4 books to do with the Stronger Men, written by Adam James.
Okay. So they have a publishing house. I take it they have a social media manager.
Oh, yeah. Multiple. They have a whole team.
Okay.
They have a videographer, social media managers. They are getting... The next phase is education. So they're putting in a 12,000 square foot, they call it a children's training center, which has been another bone of contention for the community because it wasn't actually on their original plan. So they own 12 acres, and their original plan that they submitted to the county and the city was for a compound with 4 buildings, and that was approved. It's huge. I'm sure you've seen it. We're just up the hill from it right now. But they want an additional space called a children's training center, and they say, and they've told the county in a public meeting under oath, one of their pastors, Kyle Strong, said it will not be used other than Thursday nights and on Sundays. And the neighbors are real keen on this because the neighbors say as soon as they get that built, that's going to be a school. And
a private school.
A private Christian school.
For money.
Yes. And they say this is going to take it from twice a week, because they have services on Thursdays and Sundays. It's going to make this problem, all of our parking issues and all of our noise issues and dust, it's going to make that a 7-day-a-week problem. And right now it's a 2-day-a-week problem. So the neighbors in the neighborhood are very keen on holding them to the promise of that's going to be a 2-day-a-week thing where you're just using it for your Thursday and Sunday services. What many people allege and say is, and they've said themselves in their own sermons, is, we want to make a school. So, yeah.
What's the demographic in their church?
Mainly white. There are a few minorities, but it's token at best. White conservative. It's very political. So very Trumpian. They were pretty hardcore Trump for both elections, and really got into it more in the 2020 election. They appeal to growers, to blue collar. I call it, maybe divisively, I say, if you want to get to know Wenatchee, it is, and this is not my line, this is a line that actually Mike McNaughty told me. He said, Wenatchee is undereducated and over-churched. So, okay. The blue-collar guys, the construction guys, essentially anything that you can make a lot of money doing that doesn't require a college degree, that's who Josh McPherson loves, right? And that's why his city group is full. The city group thing is they're some say control mechanisms, they say social groups. So your city group is like a like-minded group of people from your church, and it's a social thing. So you meet at somebody's house once a week. You maybe do a Bible study, maybe you just have dinner.
Hold on a second.
Oh, yeah.
My thing died. That's why. So I'll just pause this real quick.
Oh, that was the beeps.
Yeah.
Actually.
All right. Sorry about the video footage, folks. The camera gets hot. It's a hot day out, 5th of July. And yeah, but hey, we have audio taking over. So if you were watching, just keep listening. So tell me about police department training at the compound.
Not just one department. It's a regional training, regular, like once a quarter. So every 3 months, they have a contract, and departments from all around the region, from the west side, from the east side, converge on Grace City Church's compound. And at the first one, they do tactical drills. They do practicing stops and detainments. So, they'll get officers out of the car, cuff them, put them in custody, put them in a van. It's all the tactics trainings that officers need to do at regular intervals. And that occurs at Grace City Church currently, because even though Brian Burnett is no longer sheriff, he was county sheriff, and he was the president of the state sheriff's association. So he had a lot of sway, and he said, well, if we're going to do these, let's do it at my church, essentially. So the first one, Josh McPherson said a prayer over everybody in the room, all the officers, which was about 50 officers from across the state. And then they gave away gift baskets with wine and gift cards and Grace City Church swag, hats, shirts, and stuff like that. So, every department has a bit of a different policy on that, but a lot of departments have no gratuity policies. So you can't give a cop a bottle of wine or tickets to a ball game or apparel and have that be a legal or even ethical thing. But apparently this was not a problem for Grace City Church and those officers. However, one of those officers did bring me that gift basket. And so I took a picture of it, I interviewed him, and I wrote about it, which made quite a splash at the time. So that contract is still in place, and they will continue those regional police trainings at Grace City Church's compound until next year. But the current sheriff, Mike Morrison, has expressed a desire to get out of that agreement and do those regional trainings, ideally at a justice center that is yet to be built. There was recently one that was just finished in the Tri-Cities, and Spokane also has one, and that's kind of the way that these agencies are going. They have their own designated facility where they train, and that is a public facility. It is not a private church. It is a publicly funded facility controlled by public dollars, public funds, public administration. We're a long way off from that because Chelan County Sheriff's Office doesn't even have body cams yet, which is quite unusual.
That is nuts.
Yeah. Which is also a legacy of Burnett. He was very anti-body cam. So, again, the sheriff has a lot of power in every county that, in whatever county they are in charge of. So Brian Burnett was very anti-body cam. He was very pro-GCC. So we are where we are.
Damn. Okay. So you're saying there are regional police training events that are happening at the Grace City compound due to the legacy contract of the former sheriff Brian Burnett.
Yeah, Burnett. Yep.
Burnett. And what is going on is every quarter, law enforcement gets together at a church. Yep. And what sort of training is taking place? Have you heard?
It's all the tactical stuff you need. So, active shooter training.
Active shooter training in a church?
Yep.
Okay, I mean that's a real thing, but okay, what else? Continue on. Okay, go ahead.
Active shooter training. All the stuff, arrest drills. So they use the parking lot and to simulate pulling somebody over. a traffic stop that turns into arrests, which I got through public records requests. I got some drone footage that was shot by the Wenatchee Wenatchee PD of one of those drills. So that's on my Substack. You can go back and watch that. It's on my YouTube as well. Yeah, basically everything that's like the basics of law enforcement, tactical stuff. Mm-hmm. So not investigative, it's all tactical. So yeah, what to do, how to respond to an active shooter as a team, like a SWAT situation, and they use Grace City Church. And from what I was told is I'm told that this is no longer going on, but the first training where Josh McPherson prayed over everybody and they invited them to attend their church at a public police force training, that they played the bad guys. So
the aggressor.
So yeah, yeah, exactly.
Shit.
So yeah, but I'm told that no longer happens, and that's mainly because of a liability issue that law enforcement don't want. They practice with each other. They don't use outside people
that's
anymore.
Actively using and creating a paramilitary force with civilians to engage as aggressors.
Yep.
That's actively training civilians.
Yep. Yep.
So they're training. Okay. When you're using civilians as OPFOR, you are training civilians.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want another thing about that is during that Project Man Card thing where they took 13 to 15-year-old boys out into the woods up by Iniat, and they did a whole weekend of grueling. They did rappelling. They carried logs across the icy river, the Iniat River. They did small team tactical drills with airsoft guns where they had to get the girl, right? So basically capture the flag scenario where you have a VIP or a target that you have to secure, and the other team is trying to keep the hostage. And they ran around. There's video of it all. There's them running around, shooting at each other, popping flares and saying, "Get the girl, get the girl." At the end, they chant like a football team. They chant their slogan, which is "Kill the dragon, get the girl. Kill the dragon, get the girl. Kill the dragon, get the girl." You can watch the whole video. It's pretty wild. That was when they played with a 50 caliber sniper rifle, or more specifically, you'd probably know better than I do as a former Marine. That's an anti-materiel rifle.
Yeah, okay, so they had a Barrett 50 cal.
They had a Barrett 50 cal,
okay, which
they got to pop off a couple of rounds on at a target. They used, and this is more specifically why I bring it up, because they used Chelan County Sheriff's Office equipment at that rite of passage weekend. They used the red suit.
A rite of passage weekend?
Yeah, that's what they call it.
Ooh, they're tapping into something deep.
Yes.
Because there's a lack of ceremonies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and like people need ceremonies.
Exactly. Yeah, so the video that they played, the whole ceremony was to cap off their weekend. So they went Friday through Sunday, and then on Sunday night they gathered at Grace City Church for men only, basically, and said, you've done this rite of passage, and what I'd like to do is 4 or 5 of these a year, is what Josh McPherson said. We just don't have the land, so if anybody wants to give us land to basically have a paramilitary training camp on, that'd be great. Talk to us afterwards, kind of a thing. And yeah, so they dressed up in fatigues. They took group pictures. Most of the boys' fathers were there, as well as most of the pastors. So they did hand-to-hand combat training, where one of the boys or one of the men would wear the Chelan County Sheriff's Office red suit, which is that big padded head-to-toe body suit that you commonly see in law enforcement and military, and they train hand-to-hand combat that way. They did wrestling, and then they also used some of the SWAT team gear, the night vision tactical helmets with night vision goggles. No, yeah, each one is like eight grand.
Yeah, that ain't cheap.
Yeah, so those are all like taxpayer funded things, and it wasn't like the boys were wearing them. It was employees of the Chelan County Sheriff's Office, namely Chris Foreman, and I forget the other one. I think Dan McHugh. I can't remember the other guy, but they attended that weekend as instructors, with all of their SWAT team gear. So it's very impressive, especially when you're a 13 or 14-year-old boy, and this guy, who's basically a stud, is wearing all the SWAT gear and he's got night vision goggles and, you know, but those are official. Those are taxpayer.
Okay, so I was thinking they were putting on MVGs and like shooting.
No, not the boys, not the boys. But to my knowledge, to my knowledge, they didn't put them on the kids. Okay. I wouldn't be surprised if they did. But the 2 guys who were wearing all that gear were adult instructors at that rite of passage weekend. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah, the boys did get to shoot the Barrett. Okay, so yeah,
you know it. I think I hear that stuff, and the first thing I think of is the history of the Boy Scouts, because that's exactly what the Boy Scouts was intended to be. It was founded by a former Marine to teach boys, essentially create a youth fighting force in the event we get overran or invaded or something. And that was like but he was doing it not through any sort of religion, but it was like, we need a youth fighting force that can feed our military and or protect our homeland in the event of whatever. And he founded the Boy Scouts, and you see where the Boy Scouts have gone now. And these guys are going straight, we're going out for Jesus to slay the dragon and get the girl, and we're going to use Barrett 50 cals, and we're going to play with night vision and use some Chelan County Sheriff equipment. And we need some more land so we can expand our training program. And we'd like to get more training and probably more shooting and more how to assault an objective. Oh, and use pyrotechnics for signaling. That is something they're doing too. Using pyro. Like, I mean, they do it in Africa. We train in these you know, youth warriors and shit. But
child soldiers.
Child soldiers, and you could see how easily moldable they are at that age to really believe whatever they are believing, and especially when their dads are there to like celebrate it with them, like, oh, this is a good thing, or blah 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 blah. And that's so. Let's talk about the land. You brought up a good point. So let's talk about their land acquisitions and what you've been following with land.
So they bought about 13 acres in the Sunny Slope neighborhood of Wenatchee, which, for folks who don't know the Wenatchee Valley well, it is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the valley, if not the wealthiest. So land isn't cheap there. Land's not cheap to begin with, but especially in that area, location. It's right off of Highway 297 as you're driving east. If you're coming from the west side, as you're driving east, you can't help but pass it. It's currently 4 buildings, and each has its own kind of architectural vibe or its own style. One is built to look like a packing shed, like an apple packing warehouse. That's like the big building. Then they've got kind of like a foyer entrance thing that's kind of, I don't know much about architecture, but more modern, industrial. And then a chapel, which is built to look like kind of a New England white with the steeple, very iconically New England Protestant, and that's where they do their weddings. And then the other building is called the Barn, which again they like to move the goalposts on what they say they're building for and what they end up building for. They currently are using it for storage, but according to Josh McPherson himself, he wants it to, quote, make Pybus Public Market, which is our public market down on the river, look like the JV squad. So his idea is that would be a place for dance recitals for stage kids specifically to practice and put on plays. And then they'll do big meals there, have office space up above, as well as vendors down below. So none of this is on their permit processing paperwork. And on all of their permits, they told the county, we want to build this to be a storage shed, essentially. And which it, to be fair, it currently is. But according to Josh McPherson, in his own words, that's his vision for it, right? Is a building, an entity to rival Pybus Public Market, which is like our Pike's Place Market, right? Vendors, business, commerce. And then they currently have plans to build this 12,000 square foot children's training center. The way that they can get all these buildings on that lot.
12,000 square foot.
Yes. 3 stories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you can do a lot with that. There's also a thing called the silo, which that's on their logo. That is their logo, is the silo. And you can see that it's kind of off to the side of the building towards the highway. And that is their children's, it's like a play place. So the guys who designed and built this compound, this building, have worked for Disney Studios in the past and worked in Disneyland. Yeah, so it is very high concept, very high budget. They raised $12 million in a capital campaign to build this, and it took them about 6 months to raise the last $4 million. So they're well funded. Like I said, they court people who high net worth and maybe not college educated, or definitely off the beaten path of I don't acquiesce to any sort of expert, right? There is no medical professionals, anybody above Josh McPherson in the religious sense, lawyers, doctors, educators. There's a very anti-expert vibe in this church, right? And that is fostered by the McPhersons, because if you can get people to not believe anybody but you, it makes your job a lot easier,
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, the 48 Laws of Power talks about how if you associate yourself with the scandalous, or by associating yourself with the scandalous, you are increasing your influence. So yeah,
interesting.
Yeah. With the fringe or the scandalous,
yeah,
you increase your influence.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's really interesting, because I feel like one of the things that I noticed during COVID was it seemed like McPherson was really adept at capturing the feeling, right? And it's like you see this happen in times of crisis. There's some people who become really selfless and want to help others. And there are some people who think, well, I could hoard toilet paper and supplies and make a killing. Or I could, essentially create my own cult and sell people peace of mind. They'll pay a top dollar for me to tell them the world has gone crazy and you don't have to worry about whatever's happening. If it's a natural disaster that's looming, or if it's a pandemic that's on the horizon that could kill your loved ones. You bottle the fear and you sell the fear back to them, or the anecdote to a fear, and you sell that to them like a product or a commodity. And what they get is, they get to sleep at night without being too freaked out. But what they give you is their money, And he's been, according to one of my sources, he says, and this has been confirmed by other people who are no longer in the church, but he'll say stuff like, "Pay my bills," pay my bills, and it's not an uncommon occurrence. I'm not sure if he said that recently because I wrote about it. So he might have backed off of that, but who knows? Sometimes they double down. After I write something, they'll double down on something. Most recently, the whole LGBTQ thing, they've really been hot on, and they even took out a newspaper ad with other pastors that basically it wasn't an ad; it was just quotes from the Bible that say, this is why gay people are going to hell. Signed, Larry Osborne, Josh McPherson, Carrie McPherson, and it was about 5 or 6 pastors in town.
And that's why you should be a blogger, people, because you have influence over them. If they are changing what they're saying and doing based off of what you did, that means you have influence over them.
As much as they don't want to admit it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, they won't say my name, but if you watch their YouTube, he'll mention why he doesn't talk to the media from time to time, and it's essentially his rationale is it's pearls before swine, right? So it's like
Yeah.
I'm not asking him, or he just says the media, right? I don't think there's many media members other than me reaching out to him regularly, which I do. I do fairly.
Okay.
You know,
yeah, and that was another question I was going to ask. Who the hell else is covering this? Because
really nobody.
Yeah.
I mean, so the coverage really is limited to the noise complaint stuff. So the city basically cited them for a noise complaint because they're so loud on Sundays. One person said, you know, I can feel. One lady said she lives across the street too. This is across Highway 2, Highway 97, an interstate highway, 4-lane highway. She says that the music is so loud it rattles the china in her china cabinet on Sunday mornings. You know, and this is also a pretty older neighborhood, so lots of retirees.
Yeah.
And lots of folks who have kind of lodged complaints about how loud it is early on Sundays, 7 a.m., 8 a.m. And they're like, you know, do your thing. 10 a.m. is fine. But, like, I want to just sit on my back porch and have a cup of coffee and enjoy the morning, enjoy the sunset or the sunrise without being, you know, without my bass pumping in my chest.
Without hearing the call to prayer every Sunday.
Yeah. Like
from you.
Yes. Like the muezzin, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I think of. So.
Yep.
Yeah. Which it's so funny if there was a muezzin here and they were broadcasting it like they do in the Middle East, people would lose their minds.
Yeah, that's a good
They'd
point.
lose their minds. Yeah. But this is no big deal, you know. And I've said that too to people in my pitch to NCW Life, you know, to why I should be able to do this. And I said, of all these behavior patterns, of all of these things, if this guy was brown and had a funny hat and wore some sort of get-up that you regard to be a dress, you would have covered this years ago. You would have covered this years ago, and it would have been scathing. Josh McPherson would have been run out of town if his name was Ahmed, and he was Muslim, and he was an imam doing the exact same thing that Josh McPherson
in
said.
Wenatchee, Washington.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
They
would not tolerate that here. No.
Absolutely not. But because he's white and he wears flannels and he dresses like a farmer, it's totally fine.
And he takes the kids out on paramilitary training exercises, which kind of like Hitler Youth. Interesting. Yeah,
that has not been the first time that comparison has been made. But yeah, I mean, even going back into the praying over the cops, right, during the regional training, I have a text from a county sheriff employee who was at one of these trainings to another, and he said, all of our training is out there now. Josh McPherson wants or told us that we can eat for free, and he said it reminds me of David Koresh, which I think is funny. And that is not my words; that's this guy's words, and it's not the only time I've heard comparison to David Koresh. You know, he's also very aloof. So like he's spoken, and you can find it on YouTube. He's spoken about why he's inaccessible to many of his followers, and he's like, you don't just get to have lunch with me. Like, you can't just walk up and talk to me. Like, I've got things to do, and you know there's layers here, and that's reserved for people that I'm, you know, close with. Essentially, his elders, his upper echelon within this onion, and that's how other ex-members have kind of described it. It's like an onion, and it's like you can walk in the door and join, and maybe you'll always be on the outer layer of the onion, but there's so many more layers to what's going on, and there's so few people at the very inner layer of the onion that a lot of the rank and file don't necessarily know what's going on, and they just think, oh, it's a happy rock show, you know, very upbeat, kind of rock star.
It's a rock show for Jesus every Sunday. Come on down and feel the magic.
Yes. And I had another reporter, actually, who covered the last big cult in Wenatchee history, which we don't have to get into, but it was called Bethesda.
Okay.
And that was in the late 70s. Like 80 is when they, like 79, 80 is when they imploded. And they, you know, whole similar thing, bought up businesses, had influence in businesses, had a publishing house, had a audio recording. They put out books on tape and lots of musical stuff. that whole thing imploded, and there are some ex-members of Bethesda who are now Grace City Church. And the reporter who covered that trial, because their business manager went on trial for like 12 charges of financial shenanigans, and it was a federal trial. It was a huge trial, 1979. The reporter who covered that called me up, and she said, Dom, these are the kind of places where they want you to leave your brain at the door, but bring your heart and your wallet. Right? And I thought that was such a great line because I was like, yeah, I get that. I get that. The critical thinking skills are not valued. And in fact, if you ask too many questions, it's not long before you're going to find yourself on the outs. And that's what everybody who has asked questions, who is a former member, has said to me.
So Wenatchee World, what have they done about this?
They've covered the noise complaints, and that's it.
Okay. What about like your local news stations?
Well, NCW Life has a no GCC policy. That's why they canceled my show. So not too long after I basically made my pitch, I was like, here's why I want to cover them, and here's why it's newsworthy. They canceled my show. So I had a show for about 2 years on that station, and everything was fine until I started to poke around the Grace City Church story. What
was the context of your show to begin with?
It was called Common Sense.
Okay.
And so mainly local stories, but also some commentary. And it was a little bit like the format of The Daily Show, or John Oliver on HBO. Last Week Tonight, where it's like I did an opening segment where I might talk about a national story, and then I'd do a second segment that was like a local story. So I'd go out and interview somebody, and that might be a local business owner or somebody like, for instance, Lori Flaherty White, who started the Little Free Pantry here in town, and it's essentially like a lending library but for basic food staples. And around the 15th and the 1st of the month, and it's very well used. And during COVID is when she established it, when there was a lot more food insecurity, and they kept, especially single parent families, from going hungry. So a lot of stuff like that, where I was trying to find human interest, heartwarming stories, but some politics as well. So it was kind of a grab bag. One of my main themes was fighting back against misinformation, and that was through the COVID era. And so there was plenty of examples of, just blatant lies out there. And so that's also kind of why GCC started to pop up on my radar, because they were making a detrimental impact to public health and spreading a lot of misinformation. So yeah, that whole thing came to a head because I did what they told me to do, which was just blog about it. And I stopped talking about them on my show. I only mentioned them once, and they said, don't do it again, and I didn't. And so I wrote about it, and that was too much. And so I lost my show, and then I actually lost my office, too. I had to move out of my office.
Well, dang. Well, and how has the journey been since then?
Good. I mean, it's interesting. I have people... It's weird. I'm recognized everywhere I go around town.
Awesome.
Yeah. And it's 95% positive.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it is, actually. And I think that's been a surprise to people in the GCC bubble, is they expected that they were going to be able to bully me and pressure me, and probably economically pressure me more than they've been able to. And I think that their inability to really stop me from writing or bully me into leaving town or stop is not worked. So I think that's been a surprise, and it's been surprising how much overwhelming positive feedback I've gotten. I mean, I have people come up to me at least once a week in the grocery store, and say, I love what you're doing, keep doing it, this is so important, no one else is covering this, specifically Grace City Church. One guy just last week in Plaza Superjet said that he contacted the FBI after my piece on the Project Man Card Rite of Passage weekend with the 50 caliber. And
you would think that, right?
You would think
statistically that this would be raising some eyebrows.
Well, and a lot of people, people after that piece came out, they said, what are they doing? Training school shooters? Essentially.
That's a good point.
And it's this grievance thing of like, there's a war on men. you know, and men, you know, we need to be masculine, even more masculine. It's almost like a caricature. And actually, one book that I would recommend is called Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Dumas.
Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Dumas.
Yes, Jesus and John Wayne, and it's a very influential book in the Christian sphere right now, and it basically is the whole story of how we got to this toxic masculinity in Christianity, and that John Wayne mentality of like that's what a man is. But there are so many, and I think there's credence to what they say is that that's a caricature of masculinity. Right? It's not true masculinity. It's a show. And that's what women, specifically women, have said about McPherson as well, is that he's, well, in fact, a few women who went to high school with him said he was a theater geek. He was the piano playing musician. Like everything that he's doing now, this macho man, I drive a truck, I wear, you know,
I'm a prophet of God.
I'm a prophet of God in flannel and button-up flannel and jeans. That's a costume. That's an act, and he's a theater kid just doing a different production. You know,
that's the way it seems a lot of these mega churches are.
Yeah,
they're just now at one point. Do they? I don't know, but have you heard? Do they allow children to be in the auditorium? Or are the children separate from the auditorium? So
that's an interesting point, because when they started out, former members say it was really important that all the kids are a part of worship every Sunday and Thursday. Now they've changed, and that's why they want this children's training center, and the children leave and go to their own space during services. So adults are separated from children during services.
Okay. Now, because I think of things in terms of media. This is probably one on their side, but if you are going to do a live stream, you probably don't want crying kids.
Yeah, it's true.
But no, I've always thought that that's unique, because because I've been to churches like this where the kids go in, they go separately, and they come back and they are singing songs and on fire for Jesus, and it's like, what did you... So, I mean, I'm not going to complain, cool, but obviously there is some sort of something going on, some sort of socialization process.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's... Some would say indoctrination, some say socialization. It's, you know, it's definitely in that realm. You know, it is at every level. I mean, you see it just most pronounced, I think, with the kids stuff. But it's happening to the adults too. You know, I have people even yesterday at 4th of July. You know, ex-members came and talked to me, and they're great people. I love them. And for them, it was the money, the constant asks for money. But you know, they also brought up the Project Man Card, Rite of Passage weekend thing. And the guy, you know, was just like, I cannot believe how far this has gotten off the beaten path.
It's called Project Man Card.
Yeah, it's called Project Man Card, and it's a part of the Stronger Men Nation.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and this is a national thing, and that goes back to Driscoll. So, in the Ozarks, in April, they had a Stronger Man conference at a church, in a big mega church back there in Missouri, and Mark Driscoll was there. He was one of the keynote speakers. Senator Josh Hawley was also one of the speakers. They had a flames and what's the monster truck? A monster truck that drove you know, over cars in this auditorium of the church. They had a tank. They have strongmen, like circus freak strongmen kind of thing. Fire eaters, professional motocross stunts, and this is all a part of the Strongman conference. And so we just had ours over Father's Day weekend in, what was that, April or May? And it was a lower key version of that, but it's like a franchise, you know what I mean?
Gotcha.
So while they say that they are non-denominational and unaffiliated, they do these things that are definitely like a franchise kind of a thing, specifically the Stronger Men Nation.
All right. So, yeah, I'm
I don't even want to throw out suggestions as to what other things they could be doing. But I would imagine if you were to look at whoever Josh McPherson thinks as his elder, whatever they're doing, he's probably going to rip off some sort of version of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Now, what about, you mentioned the positive response. What about negative response from church members?
You know, I've had some threats online, specifically like, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if this guy, quote unquote, kills himself, or somebody should hold you and your family accountable. That was one of the weirdest ones. It's all been keyboard warrior stuff, and it hasn't been a huge backlash. There's been, you know, a couple calls, like crank calls kind of a thing. You know, maybe I've been followed a couple of times. I don't know. You can't really tell sometimes where you're like, this person's still behind me and I'm in a different whole town now. So I'm wondering why. Are we going to the same place, or, you know, kind of a thing. And specifically, you know, trucks full of young men with flags. And so you think, I wonder if this is some of our stronger men here keeping tabs on me.
How many members are currently in the...
According to them, about around 5,000. I take issue with that. I think maybe 5,000 have come and gone in the entirety of the church. I think more likely they're around 1,200 current members to 1,400. Yeah.
So like 1 to 2% of the population.
Yeah. And if we're just counting, so Wenatchee is what, 35,000, 40,000. East Wenatchee is about 25, 30,000. So put them together, you've got about roughly 70,000 people, and that's just both sides of this river. If you count Cashmere, Leavenworth as well, which a lot of people in Cashmere go to Grace City Church. So
proximity too.
Yeah, it's very close.
It's right off the highway.
It is, yeah. So, you know, with the population of, like, if we're being generous, I'd say 80,000 within a 15-minute driving radius. You know, even if we're saying 5,000, that's not a huge proportion of 80,000, but it is the largest, if not the largest, if not one of the largest churches in the region.
Okay.
So them and Sage Hills, they're actually really affiliated. I call it Budweiser, or like Coors Banquet and Coors Light. You know?
Well, they are the largest auditorium in Wenatchee.
What, GCC?
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think either them or Sage Hills also has a huge facility off of Fifth there.
Bigger than the Wenatchee Symphony Auditorium.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, because they have their own auditorium as well as, you know, like I said, that chapel which holds a bunch of people. The barn is gigantic. I mean, that barn I think is 10,000 square foot. You know, so I mean, we're talking large footprints there, and they've got their compound is 12 acres, and then they own property adjacent in that neighborhood. So we haven't even talked about the real estate stuff, but they're involved in real estate.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that. What are they like? How deep does that go? Because I saw you posted something about Cashmere, and my sister was telling me about that.
Yeah, Josh McPherson is a principal on a LLC called POH Ventures, which I believe stands for Pursuit of Happiness Ventures, and they are developing a real estate project in Cashmere off of Olive Street called Freedom Hills. So Freedom Hills brought to you by Pursuit of Happiness, and it's a multi-million-dollar project. And it's being built by Smith Excavation. So it's Josh McPherson and this guy named Greg Smith. And I'm not sure how the profits work because it's a private entity and they don't have to give me any information, right? And I've reached out to both Josh McPherson and Greg Smith multiple times to try and learn more and get a comment, and they will not return my calls. In fact, Josh McPherson blocked my number. But yeah, so it's like 12 or 16 lots, and we're talking large homes, 4,000 or 5,000 square feet homes. So the investors are going to be making probably a pretty good chunk of change. But that is Smith's business is essentially does work for GCC at cost, which is very unusual for contractors, right? Very, very unusual for a contractor to be like, yeah, you cover my materials and I'll build your house for free. And that's what they do. They have
just homie hookups.
Oh, for sure. And they talk about it on their YouTube channel too, and why they established this venture.
Open and notorious about it.
Yep.
God tells me to. Come on, hook up the Lord.
Yep. Yeah, it's called Kingdom Builders Incorporated. And they have a crew of about 5 guys. And when they're not working on the church, they're working on other for-profit construction projects. And so they essentially they have their own in-house construction company.
Well, they better be paying taxes.
Yeah.
And property taxes.
Yeah.
And not trying to funnel it through the church.
Yes, I have heard that there is, again, it's hard to, if it's not a public entity, I can't do PR, public records requests. But I've heard that, a lot of these are set up to avoid taxes, under the auspices of your tax exempt church status. So I'm not able to confirm that as of yet, but I'd like to. I would love for somebody with access to the books to walk out the door and bring them to me, which has happened with other documents. So it's not outside of the realm of possibilities, but I haven't been able to lay my hands on their financials, at least none that were recent. I have 2013 is the last year that I could get. So
did you pull from Secretary of State, Washington Secretary of State website? Like, where is that?
Well, I have that. Yeah, I mean, I can access that stuff, but other than just very basics, of what, basically what they got donated, what they spent, there's not a lot there. And there's ways that you can kind of conceal the reality of the, profits and loss there with those filings too, You don't have to tell the full story. What I'd like to know is who the top donors are, how much they donated. Because, this $12 million campaign, one family put up $1 million of that 12. So I would love to know exactly what the breakdown of, who the givers are, who are the main givers. Because that $12 million, I think, came from 863 people, according to them. So
I'm just thinking about this disproportion of, they're trying to run that Pareto principle, or more like the 1%, 99%, where you got there's 1 to 2% of the population of Wenatchee is working their way into positions of power. You've named 4 or 5 county members and
school board members,
city
councilors,
city councilors, politicians. And they're doing a really good job for now. I wonder how long they can sustain. And given $12 million that they could just fundraise based off of breaking the rules during COVID. This is the only thing that brought them to fruition, was the fact that while every other church is trying to play by the law, they say no. We're going to open it up, and because we say the law is the way we want to interpret it, you can come here. And that's fringe. And that attracted a lot of people. And I wonder how long they're going to be able to sustain it, but they've been able to clearly reach in. So I wonder how much money moves through this valley. And of $12 million through how much money moves annually, that's a lot.
Oh, yeah. And this is their capital campaign. This is on top of giving, right? So, I mean, they're expected to give a tithe, which is typically 10% of your income.
Yeah.
The capital campaign was on top of that. So, I mean, one woman said that they
called it a capital campaign.
Yeah.
Straight up, we want capital.
Yeah, they called it Liftoff is what it was called. I have a booklet called Liftoff, and it's here's what we're trying to reach, and here's what we're going to do with it. And each different phase is called a rocket. So they're we have the rocket of building the compound. One of our rockets is the foreign missions that we fund, specifically one in Africa. Another rocket is, I think, the education initiative. So it's these. It's also steeped in the Americana the imagery, and that whole thing was like branded like the NASA moon mission.
Okay.
You know, so like this Americana retro, like we're like astronauts going, you know, it's this Western chauvinism kind of a thing of like white Protestant men have been at the forefront of everything positive throughout history, which many people would argue against that idea, but essentially they're like, you know, they glorify Teddy Roosevelt. Westward expansion was awesome. Manifest Destiny, no problem with that. There's no questions should we be asking about the ethics of Manifest Destiny. And then the Cold War, the Hun of the communists, you know, it's almost like a John Birch Society outlook on communism, right? Communists, or the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, but the woke left has become the surrogate of that paranoia about the Soviets during the Cold War. In the triangle
of abuse.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. They are the boogeyman, you know. And even the guy who was the keynote speaker at their Stronger Men thing, you know, if you go and his name is, I forget his name, but he goes under the title, Another Braveheart.
Okay.
Warrior Poet.
All right.
And John Lovell is his name. John Lovell, Warrior Poet. And he has like a couple, like more than 1 million followers on YouTube. And he does buckets of food prepper stuff. So he'll sell you buckets of food. He'll sell you gun. He doesn't sell guns. He sells gun accessories, tactical gear, body armor.
Gotcha.
And
apparel.
He does tactical apparel, caps. You know, lots of black, very macho, like kind of like Black Ops looking stuff, cosplay. You know, a lot of this stuff is cosplay, in my opinion. But
absolutely cosplay.
It's soldier cosplay.
Yeah,
but with real guns. It's like, you know, we want to make sure that we can. The stakes are high enough that we can actually kill people.
And where does cosplay turn fatal? Where do you turn? Where do you go from actual Antifa fighting police in the streets?
Exactly. And so this Level guy, in addition to the tactical stuff, he does tours of Christian sites. So he'll take you to the Middle East and do a Bible style tour, or Germany and Italy and do a cultural, religious kind of tours. So he's got a few revenue streams there, but you know, he's really keen on they taught a home defense course, him and his wife, when they were here, called Katie Bar the Door is what it was titled.
Okay.
And
Katie Bar the Door.
Yep.
I need to get my gun.
Yep. Exactly.
But hey, wife, go attack the aggressor first so I can fucking egress.
That's not that. That's exactly what I thought. I was like, wait, why is Katie barring the door? You should be barring the door. Let Katie get the gun. Katie, you're front and center. You're front line, you know, kind of a thing here. I'm going to go grab my gun from the safe or whatever. But yeah, it was really weird. So yeah, I mean, he's big into. You can look him up. It's called Warrior Poet. Go read some of his blogs. There's one where he creates this fantasy fetish scenario where he has to fight his way out of Atlanta that's being overrun by an Antifa mob.
Oh man!
And how you do that, you know, and how to kill and blah blah blah. And he's really into this idea of a civil or a national divorce is what they're calling it now. He's a very, very big fan of Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's from Georgia. So I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is his rep. So he's from a rural part of Georgia, very conservative, where, you know, they're fantasizing about the day where anarchy reigns and you get out the guns and go to war with your neighbors, which I don't think is I'm not sure, but I don't think Christ would be behind that.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No, what they're doing is, and I realize this is, men will romanticize about war in the same way that women romanticize about a wedding date, and all they're doing is they're tapping into that. And yeah, they're romanticizing war when it is not romantic at all, and you can look no further than the war in Ukraine and the 20-year war in Afghanistan. And yeah, let their fantasies be fantasies, but yeah,
I hope they are. You know, I mean, the thing that really started to concern me during after George Floyd and leading up to the January 6th insurrection was how it felt like there was a Cold War that had been simmering was about to go hot. And I think a lot of these guys, and not to lump all of Grace City Church people in, but nationally you could see that, and you could see the Oath Keepers and the Promise Keeper, the Oath Keepers and the 3%ers and stuff like that. They were really, excited about the possibility that things might kick off. And this is a group that's closer to that end of the spectrum than the people who were saying, maybe let's not do a civil war. The Boogaloo kind of a thing. That was really, for a minute there in the summer of 2020, it looked like, well, they might get what they want. And in that case, I think that that's actually not very Christian and not good for our communities, right? It's not good for your community to basically start sectarian violence, essentially, and that's what I was warning people against. I was like, it might not look like Iraq. It might look more like Northern Ireland during the Troubles, where, you just have heightened levels of violence because of sectarian lines, right? It's religious, it's political, it's that intersection of religion and politics that can be such a toxic thing to stability of society. And it shows itself through violence, maybe violence that is deadly, but more often than not, just like complete segregation of populations, where this is where the Catholics live, here's where the Protestants live. And if we don't watch it, if we're not intentional about that, we can have the same thing happen in America, in my opinion.
Well, some people may argue that it's manifesting. So because of the illusion that we live in a surveillance state. Okay, because of our smartphones, we have the illusion. Even though, as a data scientist, I can tell you it takes a lot of freaking work to mine your data and sift through it, and then you can create a hack, but can you sustain a hack, right? And every update reduces. But either way, what you're getting is people that are repressing all this violence, and they're manifesting it in mass shootings because they rationalize, I'm never going to get away with what your would-be serial killers are turning into mass shooters because they're like, whatever, this is the final end, the video game for me. Let's see if I can get the high score.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think a concern with this fatalistic focus on the end times kind of a thing, where you can justify a lot of really heinous behaviors if you think the end of the world is tomorrow. I used actually the metaphor of what happens on a plane when the whole cabin thinks that they're about to die.
Oh yeah.
Right. So say you're on a 747 across the Atlantic, and it starts to drop like a stone. What do you see people do? You see people start to rip each other apart. You see people start to screw each other. You see people grab the booze cart, and you see some people just break down. And that's a microcosm of an apocalypse, because for those people, that it is an apocalypse. Their lives are about to end. But then that plane starts to level out and hits raises altitude again, and it goes back, and all the turbulence is done, and you've got a lot of people who are feeling pretty silly indeed. And that's what I think kind of happened during COVID, where we thought we were in free fall, and so you have a lot of people doing a lot of different extreme things. Some were extremely benevolent, and some were extremely narcissistic and culty, and fraudulent. And we're still, I think, coming to grips with some of the decisions that people made during that. For instance, the PPP thing, right? Some people took advantage of that, bought Lamborghinis, 4 houses, and now they're, the feds are coming knocking.
Yeah, and I wonder, all these people that were initially swayed in COVID towards thinking like this apocalyptic thinking, is how long are they going to sustain that apocalyptic thinking? Will it decrease as the economy increases? And I don't know. I don't know how long they'll be able to sustain it. It seems like there's a kind of apparent trend, like as things roar, religion goes less relevant, and as the economy depresses, religion becomes very relevant. Because,
yeah, in times of crisis, for sure. Yeah, I mean, look at the after the 1920s, after the big crash, right? It was like the roaring 20s, and religion wasn't that big of a deal. But then the depression hits, and all of a sudden you have this revival of the tent preacher, of the traveling, revival tour, and people turning back to something that gives them some purpose, gives them some peace of mind.
Treasure seekers,
yep,
all those people.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And that brings up another good point with so talk about the current sheriff now.
Oh yeah.
How did he get elected? What was the whole controversy behind? So there was a former sheriff. You laid out what he's done up to this date, into perpetuity so far.
Yeah.
So how did the current sheriff get elected? How controversial was that election? And tell me what you think.
It was very controversial. The current sheriff used to be a GCC member, and same pattern that I explained to you before. When he first came on, within a couple weeks, he was invited at the station to go to Grace City Church, and he said, okay, well, that's fine. We're looking for some community and want to meet people, and so he started attending. He left during the campaign because he felt that things changed and they were treating his family differently. Specifically his kids were getting treated differently, and so they left the church during the campaign. He's no longer a member, and like I said as well, he's basically, his priority is to take that regional police tactics training out of the GCC space and use a more public facility. He's been getting good reviews, good marks since he's taken over last fall. Actually, January 1st was officially, but basically Brian Burnett lost, and he was out of there once. After November, he was checked out, and so people have, like I said, he's been getting good reviews, good marks from the community. He's fairly young. We'll see where it goes, but it seems like he's a capable sheriff and a more moderate individual. He's really spoken out against being super political. He doesn't believe that the role of a sheriff is to be a political actor, but to basically uphold the law, which I think resonated with people a lot after Brian Burnett, because Brian Burnett was so politically motivated. He was very interested in making political statements. For instance, signing an anti-trans bathroom petition in full uniform at a school board meeting, going down to the Mexican border and taking all paid expenses paid on the taxpayer dime, learning tour with one of the constitutional sheriffs down there, flying around in helicopters and stuff like that. He received criticism for being more interested in hot button national political issues than actually, being a sheriff in Chelan County. So that's a change. It's a big change, and one that I think people are. It's a breath of fresh air.
Damn. So I'm imagining this. I'm imagining being a new, police officer. Okay, for the Wenatchee Police Department. Hey, I'm just a guy. I meet all the qualifications. I'm a new police officer. Maybe been in the department for a minute. And hey, we all go to the same church, but I'm choosing to run against the incumbent because, well, I think I got a shot, And then as soon as I do that, I get ostracized from the religious community, forced out, and I'm happy he won.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I hope he sounds like a great guy to interview.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've interviewed him a couple of times.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
awesome. Yeah, so tell
Yeah.
me what his take has been.
Oh, well, I mean, basically that. You know,
Yeah,
he's a very reserved guy as far as that. He doesn't really, you know, he's got a good head on his shoulders as far as the whole thing goes. I mean, and he said it during the campaign. You know, he wants a change of pace, a change of culture, and I think that a lot of people in that department felt the same way. You know, so, and a lot of people in the county, you know, were getting tired of the constant political stuff. And he basically, his campaign promise, one of the major ones was, I'm not going to get involved in politics. I'm just going to do the job of, I'm just a cop, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do police work. I'm not going to do political activism. And that's been well received.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. And
Yeah.
that's a good sign. So
And he's also fairly young, and, you know, I think he's got a big future. So
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll look forward to watching how he does and
Yeah.
how you report on the triumphs of his career.
yeah.
So since then, Barnett has it seems like he's doubled down.
He's
On the
actually
church.
faded really kind of
Okay.
into the back. He's doing his own thing now.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, he's still in the area, and he still attends GCC as far as I know. But I don't know. I mean, I got a lot of people said that he had his eye on other elected office, so I could see him maybe running for something else. But I think this was a surprise. I think it really surprised him that he lost. I think he thought he had it in the bag, and then he lost by almost 20%. So it was a huge upset. And that's another reason why people recognize me around town. Is that was one of my biggest stories, you know.
Well,
And I followed that.
congratulations.
Yeah, well, thank you. I followed that through the whole campaign, and I think it opened a lot of people's eyes, you know. And I also try and maintain a certain amount of like neutrality, right? It's like I have my own opinions, and I put my 2 cents in. That's actually my little segment at the end of a lot of my pieces. I say my 2 cents, and I kind of say, you know, basically I just say, here's what it is. Here's what people have said. Here's what this side has said. Here's what this side has said. Here's what bystanders say, and here's what at the very end. Here's what I think. My 2 cents doesn't mean that you should vote a certain way or do a certain thing or think a certain thing. It's your prerogative to make up your own mind, but here's my take, you know. And so I think people, and they've communicated that they respect that, and they like the fact that, you know, I try to maintain a certain amount of neutrality while also acknowledging that everybody has a bias, everybody has their own point of view. I'm no different, but I try not to let that. I try to acknowledge it and not let it be a subversive part of my coverage, you know, because at the end of the day, you do need to call a spade, and if somebody is being a bully, or if somebody is misusing their power, it's not biased journalism to say that. It's just saying what is reality is reality. And I think so often journalism and journalists get into this both sides thing where it's a false equivalency, and you say, well, this side, this side has a PhD in astrophysics, and he says that the world, and he's been to space, and he's seen that the world is round. And then you have the other side say, well, this is Donnie, and Donnie didn't graduate from the 8th grade and got a GED, which is fine. And then he says the world's flat, and he has no qualifications. He says the world's flat. And then we're going to have them debate, and who knows? One could be right, one could be wrong. Well, that's actually not unbiased journalism. You're doing a bad job of journalism, because the overwhelming evidence is on the side of the astrophysicist who's seen with his own eyeballs the world is round from space. You know, and that's too often what journalists do, because they want to not offend anybody. Oh, I'm sorry, but you're in the wrong business. if your overarching, you know, priority is not to offend anybody.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Don't call yourself a journalist.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to honestly report things, and the truth can be difficult for people to handle, especially if maybe you're not a prophet from God.
Yeah, yeah. And if you think that, it's detriment. It's not a good practice of journalism to say, you know, he thinks he's a child of God or he's a prophet of God, and we're going to offer that without any sort of context or qualification. You know, you're giving a microphone and a platform to misinformation, essentially. So.
Yeah, no, that's a big thing with media and the bubbles, and how everybody becomes their own little media bubble, and how independent journalism is important, and let the viewer, let the audience decide after they have heard the long form facts drawn out what they think is going on. But so what else, what other?
Well, I have a piece about Grace City Church coming out in a publication called The Bulwark later this summer. They're out of Washington, D.C., and they're a political, cultural publication, online publication, kind of grew out of the old daily, or the old Weekly Standard, which was a magazine. That got shut down, and the crew from the Weekly Standard started The Bulwark. And so this is kind of the same group of people. And it's going to be a long form piece. It's about 40,000 words, so it's going to be long, like a short book. And we're editing it. They're editing it now. So that'll be out later this summer, and I'm hoping it'll get some attention.
Well, cool. Tell everybody about the Wenatchee Humane Society.
Oh, yeah.
What's going on there?
So the Humane Society is in a bit of a weird space right now. They have a new director who started in January. He has been accused of inhumane treatment of animals, creating a toxic workspace, bullying. The board of directors is behind him, but he's been receiving a lot of criticism, and when people do criticize him, he kind of threatens to sue, and says they're libeling him or slandering him, and tries to get people to take down Facebook posts and other social media posts that are critical of him and the Humane Society. So I've been covering that. I wrote my first piece in February on that, and I just wrote my follow-up piece. You know, people say, like, for instance, there was a lady who is elderly. She's like in her 80s. She went to go to Harborview ER. Her cat got out. It was an old cat, 20 years old. It got out of her yard, got picked up by a neighbor, took it to the Humane Society, and they euthanized it by the next morning. Typically, it's a 72-hour hold before they euthanize an animal, but according to James Pumphrey, the director, the cat was in such bad shape that they had to immediately destroy it. This obviously did not sit well with the woman who was at ER in Harborview, and she's been a vocal critic of the whole situation since that happened, and he's threatened to sue her. So that's some of the things that are going on right
so now. How many reports of animal abuse have you encountered?
At this point, countless, but it's also a handful of people who have been kind of collecting these stories, right? And a lot of people want to talk off the record too, because they're afraid. And you know, for instance, one lady leveled some criticism on her Facebook about him and the Humane Society's policies, and he called her up and once he realized that she was a financial manager for Edward Jones, he threatened to take some of the money that the Humane Society had in Edward Jones funds out to punish her. So that's the kind of mentality, and we'll see if it works. It's a bold move.
If he comes after me because of this podcast, I will data mine him, and I will fuck up his life with his own data in ways he never thought were legally possible. Because you don't fuck with people who can engineer your data.
Yeah.
Other than that, what other things?
Oh, boy, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I've been talking for so long. Yeah. No, that's really what I've been working on. I got another piece on Freedom Hills coming out here pretty soon.
What's Freedom Hills?
That cashmere development that Josh McPherson and Greg Smith are building, the POH, Pursuit of Happiness Ventures.
So what are they going to
build? Houses. So like
Okay.
they've got like 12 to 14 lots. Yeah. And the lots are each about $1 million a piece, and then that's just the ground. So the houses, Smith will build your house after you buy the lot. So we're multi-million-dollar project. So, but according to neighbors, he's taking too much water, so nobody has water pressure. So, yeah, yeah. So,
Interesting.
and the irrigation district said, "Well, we can't really do anything about that."
Oh yeah.
So.
Damn. Well, I know you're a man who's going to keep an eye on it, and we've been running for a minute, so yeah, I know it's tough, especially today at the heat. So tell everybody where they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, I'm on. I write mostly on Substack.
Okay.
So Dominic Bonney reports on Substack. I'm also on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. People can find me there. I link to most of my pieces, if not every piece, on social media. So you can find an easy link to it. But yeah, I mean, subscribe to my Substack. If people want to support, they can do a paid subscription that gives them more exclusive content, some exclusive posts, and basically access to everything I've written. But you can subscribe for free too, and a lot of the stuff I write is free posts. Anything that has to do with like stuff the community should know, I put out there for free. And if they want to get more of the inside scoop on stuff and stuff that is more off the beaten path, they can pay and get the exclusive content. So,
Cool. What about YouTube? YouTube channel?
I am on YouTube, and I do post some of my video reporting on YouTube.
Okay.
So like, for instance, recently I took a flight on the Miss Vidal, which I'm not sure if you know the Miss Vidal, but it's a famous plane.
Oh yeah, the famous plane, the Trans-Pacific flight that landed here in Wenatchee, Washington.
Yes, that's right, in like 1920 sometime. So I took a rite on that. I made a video.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun actually.
Cool.
Yeah, I can send you the link.
Yeah, I'll put all those. I'll put the links to his channel in the video description, and to your Facebook and your Instagram and every place that you have a link to, and I'll put it in the video description.
Yeah.
And be sure to like and subscribe to his channels. Follow him for more updates on what is developing in Wenatchee, Washington.
Yep.
So it's an interesting place, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did. Once again, thank you for listening. My name is Data Mining Mike, and here we have Dominic Bonney, the paramount vanguard of credible Wenatchee journalism.
Well, thank you.
All right. Goodbye, folks.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.